7 children and the Alps, supposedly. Beautiful music, gorgeous.
In 1964, during the filming of The Sound of Music, a single sound brought chaos to the set and nearly destroyed one of the film's most iconic scenes. It wasn't dramatic or tragic. It was funny, too funny. So funny that no one could stay in character. Take after take was ruined. The studio spent thousands trying to fix it, then chose to bury the story completely. For decades, it stayed hidden, until Julie Andrews finally told the truth on live television. What really happened in that gazebo? And why did Christopher Plummer, who hated the film, agree to keep quiet? Europe falls in love with the story. It all started quietly in the mid-1950s. Back in 1956, a German producer named Wolfgang Liebeniner released 2 films based on Maria von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. The first was Die Trapp Family, and it was followed by a sequel a year later. They were low-budget, sentimental, and very European in tone, but they struck a chord. In post-war West Germany, people were craving stories that were heartwarming and full of hope. These 2 films delivered just that. Both films turned into box office gold. In fact, they were the biggest commercial film success in West Germany at the time. The story's charm didn't stop there. It spread like wildfire through Europe and even found an audience in South America. People across different languages and cultures connected with the image of a musical Austrian family standing up to the Nazis and choosing love over fear. But when the films were shown to American studios, the reaction was not great. To put it nicely, Hollywood thought the movies looked like a high school play, too sentimental, too corny, too foreign. Nobody was lining up to bring the Von Trapps to the US screen. That is, until a man named Vincent J. Dunhue stepped in. Dunhue was no ordinary director. He had just won a Tony Award and had a sharp eye for stories that could move people. Paramount sent him to scout out new projects, and he happened to screen the German Trapp family movies. At first, he had the same reaction everyone else did, clumsy and awkward. But then something unexpected happened. Beneath the low-budget production and outdated style, he saw something real. The story had soul. It had heart. And Dunhue said something no one had dared to say before: you can't make this a film. You have to turn it into a Broadway musical, for Mary Martin. That one sentence flipped the switch, and triggered a chain reaction that would lead to one of the biggest musicals in history. But none of it would have happened if Maria von Trapp hadn't made a very unusual, and some might say terrible, business decision years earlier. The $9,000 deal. Maria von Trapp was no Hollywood insider. She had no agent, no lawyers looking out for her. She was just trying to support her family. So, when German filmmakers came knocking in the early 1950s asking to buy her life story, she said yes, for a one-time payment of just $9,000. Now, that might sound small, and it was. Even in 1950s money, it wasn't much. Adjusted for today, it's about $104,000. Not bad for a quick deal, but a tiny fraction of what was coming down the line. And to make things worse, Maria had unknowingly signed away more than she realized. Hollywood came calling later, offering to buy the title of her book, hoping to skip the rights issues and just adapt a story inspired by it. But Maria stood her ground. She insisted that if her family's story was going to be told, it had to be told truthfully and in full. No cherry-picking. By the late 1950s, Mary Martin, the biggest Broadway star of the era, and her husband Richard Halliday were determined to bring the Von Trapp story to the stage. But there was just one problem: no one knew where Maria was. As it turned out, Maria von Trapp was deep in the jungles of Papua New Guinea, doing missionary work with Father Franz Wozner, the family's longtime musical director. They had no phones, no internet, just handwritten letters. And those letters? Maria didn't even open them. Every time they arrived at a new mission post, a pile of mail would be waiting, often with letters from some couple in America trying to talk to her about Broadway. She tore them up. Literally. Maria wasn't interested in showbiz. She was focused on serving people in remote villages, running clinics, teaching music, and living simply. Broadway was the last thing on her mind. But then something unexpected happened. When Maria and Father Wozner finally returned to the US by ship, they docked in San Francisco. And waiting for them at the pier was none other than Richard Halliday. He handed Maria 2 tickets to see his wife perform in Annie Get Your Gun. Maria agreed to go, probably just to be polite. But what she saw on that stage blew her away. Mary Martin was charming, powerful, and magnetic. Maria was moved, but still had bad news to deliver. She explained she had already sold the film rights to the Germans years ago. That door was technically closed. Still, she gave the couple a surprising green light. "You're welcome to give it your best shot," she told them. That one chance, one casual okay from Maria, would kick off one of Broadway's biggest legends. The gamble that paid off. When producers first got serious about turning Maria von Trapp's life into a stage musical, they had a very different plan. The idea was to mix traditional Austrian folk songs, like the real tunes the Trapp family sang in concerts, with just a few new songs to help tie the story together. Think a little Broadway flavor sprinkled over old European charm. But when they approached Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein to write just 1 or 2 songs, the legendary duo didn't hold back. Rodgers and Hammerstein basically said, "Thanks, but no thanks, either we write the whole thing or we're out." They didn't want their work clashing with old Austrian ballads. It was all or nothing. And that moment changed everything. The producers hit pause. Rodgers and Hammerstein still had to finish Flower Drum Song, so the new project was shelved temporarily. But when they finally returned to the Von Trapp story, they rewrote the entire concept from scratch, with all original songs. And not just any songs. We're talking about classics like My Favorite Things, Du Mi, Edelweiss, and Climb Evy Mountain. Songs that the world still sings today. Then came opening night, November 16, 1959. The curtain rose at the Luntfontein Theatre on Broadway with Mary Martin as Maria and Theodore Bikel as Captain Von Trapp. The production cost $400,000 to stage, a hefty budget back then. But the buzz was electric. Ticket sales exploded, eventually raking in over $232 million in advanced bookings alone. Let that sink in, over $232 million, before most people had even seen the show. Mary Martin barely took a day off. She only missed 1 performance in the entire run. The show ran for 1,443 performances, nearly 4 years, before closing in June 1963. But by the summer of 1960, something else started heating up. A bidding war for the movie rights. Studios knew this wasn't just a hit, it was a phenomenon. 20th Century Fox came out on top, shelling out $1,250,000 for the rights, which would be more than $13 million in today's money. That was a shocking number, especially for a studio in deep trouble. Why? Because Cleopatra, Fox's previous big-budget epic, had nearly destroyed them. It went $15 million over budget and took down careers with it. Fox was bleeding money. So when they bought the rights to The Sound of Music, people thought they were crazy. But the contract had one sneaky little clause. If the film made more than $12.5 million, Rodgers and Hammerstein's estate would get 10% of the profits. Co-writer Howard Lindsay literally laughed at it. He didn't think the movie would get anywhere near that number. He couldn't have been more wrong. And now we get to one of the biggest what ifs in Hollywood casting history. Julie Andrews' Revenge, Hollywood's big mistake. By the early 1960s, Julie Andrews had already conquered the stage. She was beloved for her role as Eliza Doolittle in My Fair Lady on Broadway. Her voice was stunning, her charm undeniable. But when it came time to turn My Fair Lady into a film, Hollywood turned its back on her. The studio heads said she wasn't camera-ready. In other words, they thought she wasn't glamorous enough for the big screen. So instead of casting the woman who made the role famous, they chose Audrey Hepburn, a move that stunned Broadway fans. Audrey was elegant, sure, but she couldn't sing like Julie. In fact, most of her songs in the film had to be dubbed. Julie was devastated. She had carried My Fair Lady for years, only to be passed over at the biggest moment. It was the kind of snub that could have ended a career. But fate had other plans. Around that same time, director Robert Wise was looking for someone to play Maria von Trapp in The Sound of Music. He wasn't convinced Julie was the right fit, until someone at Disney showed him an early cut of Mary Poppins. The film wasn't even finished yet. But just a few minutes in, Wise turned to the screenwriter and said, "Let's sign her, before anyone else does." Julie was offered the role of Maria for a flat fee of $225,000. In today's money, that's about $2.28 million. It was a decent paycheck for a rising star, but here's the catch: there were no royalties, no bonuses, and no box office cut. Once she cashed that check, that was it. Meanwhile, Mary Martin, who had played Maria on stage, had negotiated a very different deal. She earned more than $8 million from her share of the Broadway profits. Fox didn't think Andrews was a big enough star to deserve a back-end deal. That decision would come back to haunt them. Because Mary Poppins turned out to be a smash hit. Julie Andrews not only proved the studio wrong, she won an Oscar for Best Actress. And when she accepted the award, she did something cheeky. She thanked Jack Warner, the very man who had rejected her for My Fair Lady. It was a sweet, subtle form of revenge, and the audience loved it. Still, The Sound of Music would become her most iconic role. And even though the film would go on to earn hundreds of millions worldwide, Julie never saw a single dollar beyond that original flat fee. And she wasn't the only one Fox tried to shortchange. The role no one wanted. While Julie Andrews was already charming everyone behind the scenes, casting her on-screen partner was turning into a serious headache. The role of Captain George Von Trapp should have been a dream gig. He was the handsome, brooding widower who slowly falls in love with Maria. But here's the thing, no major actor wanted to play him. Robert Wise, the director, tried everyone. He considered Sean Connery, who had just shaken the world as James Bond. He also reached out to Richard Burton, known for his intense performances, and his rocky relationship with Elizabeth Taylor. Even Bing Crosby was floated as a possibility. But none of them fit the tone or spirit of the film. Some said no. Others just didn't seem right. Then came Christopher Plummer. He was classically trained, elegant, and sharp. But he didn't like the script. At all. In fact, Plummer thought The Sound of Music was too sweet, too sentimental. He called it The Sound of Mucus behind the scenes and turned down the role several times. The idea of playing a strict, emotionally stiff father in a musical didn't interest him. But Robert Wise believed in him. So he flew to London to convince Plummer face-to-face. Plummer agreed, but only under one condition: he wanted to reshape the character. He told the writers the captain needed more depth, more heart, better dialogue. And most of all, he needed his own song, something to show his emotional side. That's how Edelweiss ended up in the film. It's not an Austrian folk song, like many believe. Rodgers and Hammerstein actually wrote it for Plummer's character. The idea was to give the captain a quiet, personal moment of vulnerability. Even with those changes, Plummer still struggled. He later admitted that he drank through parts of the shoot. During the filming of the family's big farewell performance to the Nazis, arguably one of the most intense scenes, Plummer was actually drunk. He said it helped him get through the stiffness of the role. Despite all the tension, his performance worked. He brought dignity and restraint to the captain, making the character's transformation, from cold disciplinarian to loving father, feel real. And audiences fell in love with it. But here's a wild twist: Christopher Plummer also had a flat contract. No royalties. No back-end deal. Just like Julie Andrews, he walked away with a set paycheck. As the film went on to gross over $286 million around the world, both stars watched from the sidelines, cheered, but did not receive beyond what was agreed on. And while the adults were dealing with contracts and rewrites, the younger cast members were about to face their own chaos. Liesl, Friedrich, and the future stars. The search for the Von Trapp children was anything but simple, and the competition was fierce. Take the role of Liesl, the oldest daughter. Believe it or not, a young Mia Farrow auditioned 3 times. She was only 20, still fresh-faced and delicate. The casting team's notes were blunt, sweet, but no spark. Not enough energy. Can't really dance. That was that. Farrow was out. Ironically, the woman who did get the part, Charmian Carr, was actually 21. Not years old. 21 years older than Farrow. Yep, Carr was cast to play 16 while already in her 20s. But she had something Farrow didn't, this confident glow and graceful charm that lit up every room. Losing out on The Sound of Music may have stung for Farrow, but it opened the door to something even bigger. Just a few years later, she'd terrify the world in Rosemary's Baby, and her Hollywood path would never be the same. As for Friedrich, the second oldest child, one of the actors who auditioned was Kurt Russell. Yes, the same Kurt Russell who would later become an action star. Patty Duke and Terry Garr also threw their names in. But in the end, the role went to Nicholas Hammond, a thoughtful, 15-year-old kid with a calm intensity the director loved. Years later, Hammond made history in a whole new way. He became the very first live-action Spider-Man on television in 1977. The rest of the Von Trapp kids? They were handpicked after grueling auditions. The casting team searched for months, until they found just the right faces, voices, and personalities. And what they built wasn't just a cast, it was a family. Even decades later, the actors who played the children remained close. They reunited often, supported each other through life events, and kept in touch with both Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer until the very end. Their bond felt real because it was real. And the world noticed. The box office takeover. For nearly 3 decades, one film ruled Hollywood's box office like an untouchable king, Gone with the Wind. Since its release in 1939, it sat at the top, undefeated through wars, golden ages, and new technologies. Then came The Sound of Music. When it was released in 1965, no one saw this coming. But by November of 1966, just 18 months later, it had done the impossible. It dethroned Gone with the Wind, raking in an unheard-of $286 million at the global box office. And here's the thing, that was not inflated modern money. That was actual earnings, based on ticket prices from the 1960s. Which makes it even more incredible. To put it another way, The Sound of Music sold 283 million tickets around the world. That's nearly 1 out of every 12 people alive at the time. People who didn't even speak English were humming Do Re Mi. In villages without electricity, folks still recognized Edelweiss. And there was no viral marketing, no online trailers, no streaming platforms. Just word of mouth, radio mentions, glowing reviews, and families going back to see it a second, third, even 10th time. It became more than a film. It became a global phenomenon. A moment in history that people shared, regardless of country, language, or age. And then came the cherry on top, the Oscars. The Sound of Music swept the Academy Awards, winning 5: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Sound, Best Editing, and Best Score. Director Robert Wise, who had already made waves with West Side Story, proved that lightning could strike twice. This wasn't just a fluffy musical anymore. Critics had to admit it, it was art. Every technical detail, every beat of editing, every soft piano note, and crisp footstep was noticed and honored. However, what people didn't notice, what they were never supposed to know, was the chaos behind one of the film's most romantic scenes. The gazebo scene disaster, the forbidden scene. The gazebo scene between Maria and Captain Von Trapp is one of the most beloved romantic moments in movie history. You know the one, soft moonlight, quiet music, a slow kiss as they finally confess their love. But what you don't know is this, the scene was a complete disaster to film. The problem? The lights. Specifically, the massive carbon arc lights used to simulate moonlight. These were industrial machines, bright, hot, and loud. Really loud. And not just any kind of loud. They made a noise that sounded exactly like a fart. A long, wet, flat raspberry. Every single time Christopher Plummer leaned in to kiss Julie Andrews, PPPPFFFEC. Over and over. Julie said they tried 20 times. But the moment they got close to each other's faces, the lights let out that same ridiculous sound. They couldn't stop laughing. Even the serious lines, Maria, I love you, got destroyed by giggles. The entire crew was helpless. Hours went by. Nothing worked. Eventually, director Robert Wise gave up. He scrapped the original plan. No more bright lighting. Instead, he decided to shoot the whole scene in silhouette. He placed Julie and Christopher in front of the glowing gazebo windows. That way, their faces were mostly hidden, and their laughter didn't show. It ended up looking even more romantic. That glowing, dreamy style? That wasn't on purpose. It was damage control. And the studio? They didn't want anyone to know. 20th Century Fox clamped down hard. Cast and crew were warned not to mention the noises, the laughter, or the failed takes. For years, fans believed the scene had gone off without a hitch. The truth only came out decades later, when Julie Andrews finally told the story on a talk show. She laughed, remembering it. It's very hard to be nose-to-nose doing a love scene and having these awful raspberries coming at you from below. But while the audience laughed, no one knew that Plummer himself was carrying a much heavier secret. Plummer's private misery. Christopher Plummer might have looked calm and collected on screen, but behind the scenes, he was deeply unhappy. He despised the sound of music. He called it gooey, mocked it as the sound of mucus, and even referred to it in interviews as just S&M. To him, the movie was overly sentimental, totally out of sync with the serious, challenging roles he wanted to play. And it showed. Plummer often isolated himself during filming in Salzburg. He once said the picturesque city felt more like a prison of sentimentality than a European getaway. Part of that was his own doing. He drank a lot and later admitted to gaining weight from all the rich food and alcohol. Still, he showed up. Always professional. Even when he was drunk, which he openly confessed to in later years. He said some scenes were filmed while he was 3 sheets to the wind, including one of the most emotional moments in the movie. But somehow, in the middle of all his resentment, Plummer gave a performance that would become iconic. The drunk scene that made everyone cry. There's a moment in the film that gets everyone emotional, when Captain Von Trapp sings Edelweiss with tears in his eyes during the festival. It feels so real, so heartfelt, but here's the twist: Christopher Plummer was completely drunk when they filmed it. He confessed in his 2008 memoir, In Spite of Myself, that he had been drinking heavily that day. He called himself a young and arrogant bastard who had no real connection to the film's sentimental tone. And yet, he managed to deliver a performance that moved millions. And that's the irony. The scene many fans point to as proof of his character's emotional transformation was carried by an actor who could barely stand straight. Hollywood magic at its finest, or its most bizarre. But that wasn't even the biggest blow to his pride. The voice that wasn't his. You know those scenes where Captain Von Trapp sings? Yeah, that's not Plummer singing. At least, not most of the time. Turns out, the high notes and extended vocal parts were performed by Bill Lee, a professional singer who also did vocals for Disney movies like Sleeping Beauty and Mary Poppins. Plummer's speaking voice was used for transitions and dialogue, but when the real singing kicked in, especially in Edelweiss, Lee took over. Plummer was furious. He felt the decision undermined his performance. But the producers didn't think he could pull off the vocal demands, and they weren't taking chances. Ironically, most fans never noticed. Lee's voice blended so seamlessly that people still believe they're hearing Plummer sing. By the time the movie came out, Plummer was so annoyed he could barely say the film's name without an eye roll. But decades later, he admitted the film had charmed him in the end. It just took a few decades, and a lot of time away from the spotlight, for him to see the impact it had on the world. And while Plummer was quietly battling his own demons, things on set were getting dangerously real for others too. The day little Gretel almost died. Filming in Salzburg wasn't just emotionally draining, it was physically dangerous. During the boat scene, where the Von Trapp children fall into the lake, 5-year-old Kim Carafe, who played little Gretel, nearly drowned. Here's what really happened. Just before shooting, the crew informed Julie Andrews that Kim couldn't swim. So the plan was for Andrews to fall toward the child when the boat tipped and grab her immediately. But when the boat flipped, everything went wrong. Andrews fell backward, away from Gretel. Kim slipped under the water twice before another actor jumped in to pull her out. She ended up vomiting from swallowing lake water and developed a fear of swimming that lasted for years. Even Julie Andrews was shaken. She later called the incident one of the scariest moments on set. But Gretel wasn't the only one who took a hit filming those now iconic scenes. The magical opening scene that slammed Julie Andrews into the ground. We all remember it. Julie Andrews, arms outstretched, twirling through a green alpine meadow as the camera soars above her. It looks peaceful, joyful, like something out of a dream. But here's what the audience didn't see. To get that sweeping aerial shot, A helicopter had to fly just 20 feet above her. Each time it circled around, the wind from the blades slammed Andrews flat into the grass. She was knocked over again and again, at least 6 or 7 times, and had to keep getting up, brushing off dirt, and smiling like nothing happened. She later joked in interviews that she was almost launched into Austria. The scene looked magical, but filming it felt like a full-body tackle from the sky. A beautiful disaster in Salzburg. Filming in Salzburg looked like a dream. Rolling hills, perfect meadows, fairytale castles, it was the ideal setting for a musical. But behind the beauty was a nightmare. The original budget for the film was $8.2 million, already expensive for the mid-1960s. But no one warned the crew that Salzburg had some of the worst weather in Europe. 1964 turned out to be one of the wettest years on record. Director Robert Wise thought they could wrap up location shooting in 6 weeks. It ended up taking 11. Rain delays brought everything to a standstill. Over 250 cast and crew members sat around in soggy clothes, wasting time, and burning through the budget. The cost of hotel rooms, equipment repairs, extra meals, and rising wages made the studio executive sweat. Fox was already reeling from the disaster that was Cleopatra, and now this cheerful little musical was threatening to blow up just as badly. One studio insider even whispered, "This movie might be the end of us." But there was one more unexpected shakeup that made things even riskier. The director who walked away. Long before Robert Wise was hired, the legendary director William Wyler was supposed to lead The Sound of Music. In early 1963, he even quit his spot on Fox's board to avoid a conflict of interest. That's how serious it looked. But Wyler had doubts from the start. He didn't like the stage musical. He didn't feel connected to the script. Even when he flew to New York to see the Broadway show, he left confused. The songs didn't feel natural to him, they just didn't fit the story. He said there was something else too. Wyler was losing his hearing. It made directing a musical even harder. His wife could see it clearly, he just wasn't into it. So Wyler began quietly looking for a way out. He needed a clean break, something that wouldn't raise suspicion. That's when producers offered him The Collector, based on the John Fowles novel. Wyler read the script and instantly knew this was more his style: dark, twisted, psychological. He asked the Zanuck family, who were running the studio, to release him from his Sound of Music contract. The official story? Scheduling conflicts. That's what the press was told. That's what Fox repeated. But the truth was, Wyler ran the other way. And that left the door wide open for Robert Wise, who stepped in late 1963 to pick up the pieces. Thanks for watching, fam. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. Check out the next video that pops up on your screen.